What if I told you that a 13-year-old girl, hiding in silence, wrote words that would change the world forever? She had no stage, no freedom, no power, only a diary and a dream. Today, you will discover how her simple words became stronger than war itself, and while you listen, you will improve your English in a deep and meaningful way. Welcome to another powerful and emotional story on Silver Narratives, where you learn English through real and unforgettable lives. Today, we will walk together through the life of a young girl who never had the chance to grow up, yet her words became stronger than time itself. She did not live long enough to see peace or freedom, but she wrote about the beautiful world she hoped for. Her name was Anne Frank. This is not only a story about war, hiding, and fear. It is the story of a brave girl who chose hope when the world around her was full of darkness. She used her diary as a safe place for her thoughts, her dreams, and her voice. Even when danger surrounded her, her heart stayed alive through her writing. In this story, you will discover how one young girl's simple words became more powerful than weapons, and how one quiet voice can echo across history. This video is also perfect for improving your English because it is written in clear, simple language. Every sentence is easy to understand, emotional, and meaningful. While you listen, you will feel the story deeply and grow your English skills at the same time. Now, let us begin the story of Anne Frank. Anne Frank was born on June 12, 1929, in Frankfurt, Germany. Her full name was Anneliese Marie Frank, but everyone lovingly called her Anne. She was an energetic, curious, and cheerful child who loved to laugh and talk. She had an older sister named Margot and two caring parents, Otto and Edith Frank. The Frank family was Jewish, but they were modern in their thinking. They believed strongly in education, kindness, and being part of the community. Anne's father, Otto Frank, was a gentle and intelligent businessman who had served in World War I. Anne felt very close to him and trusted him deeply. Her mother, Edith, was more traditional and quiet, and although she loved Anne very much, their relationship was sometimes difficult. Anne and her sister Margot had very different personalities. Margot was calm, serious, and always well-behaved, while Anne was lively, outspoken, and full of questions about the world. She was also very intelligent and especially talented in writing. Even her teachers noticed her special gift with words. She dreamed of becoming a famous writer, or maybe even a movie star one day. However, while Anne was growing up, something dangerous was slowly rising in Germany. In 1933, when Anne was only 4 years old, Adolf Hitler became the leader of Germany. His rule brought fear and strict control, especially for Jewish families like Anne's. Life was about to change in ways no one could imagine. Adolf Hitler hated Jewish people and blamed them for all of Germany's problems after World War I. Under his leadership, the Nazi Party began creating cruel and unfair laws that slowly took away the rights of Jewish families. Jewish children were no longer allowed to attend certain schools. Jewish adults could not own businesses freely. Step by step, they were treated like strangers and enemies in their own country. Fear began to grow everywhere. Anne's father, Otto Frank, understood the danger very early. He was thoughtful and wise, and he knew that staying in Germany could become deadly for his family. So in 1934, when Anne was only 5 years old, they moved to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, hoping to find safety and peace. Leaving Germany meant leaving behind their home, relatives, and familiar streets. For a small child like Anne, it meant saying goodbye to everything she knew. But in Amsterdam, life slowly began again. For a few years, the Frank family felt free. Otto started a business called Opekta, which sold ingredients for making jam. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, and Anne and her sister Margot went to good schools. Anne quickly made new friends. She was cheerful, talkative, and full of life. She loved reading books, watching movies, laughing at jokes, and dreaming about the future. Her teachers often said she talked too much in class, but they also saw how intelligent and creative she was. Anne knew she did not want an ordinary life. She wanted excitement, freedom, and adventure. She often wrote short stories in her notebook and even created imaginary friends to write letters to. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a famous writer. But peace did not last long. In 1940, Germany invaded the Netherlands. Anne was 11 years old when the Nazi soldiers arrived. Slowly, the same painful rules that had existed in Germany began to appear in Amsterdam. Jewish children were forced to leave their schools. Jewish families had to register their names and wear a yellow Star of David on their clothes so everyone could identify them. They were no longer allowed to enter parks, cinemas, libraries, or many public places. Life became smaller and more restricted each month. Anne and Margot had to say goodbye to their non-Jewish friends. The feeling of safety disappeared. Otto Frank tried his best to protect his family, but he knew the situation was becoming more dangerous every day. Then, on July 5, 1942, something happened that changed everything. Margot received a call-up notice from the Nazis ordering her to report to a work camp. But people understood the terrible truth behind those words. These were not normal work camps. Many Jews who were sent away never returned. They were being taken to death camps. The time for waiting was over. The Frank family had only one choice left: they had to hide. Otto Frank read the letter carefully. Then he looked at his wife and his two daughters and said only one sentence: "We go into hiding now." That same night, the family quietly packed a few bags. They wore many layers of clothing so they would not look suspicious carrying suitcases. They left behind their cat, their furniture, their home, and their neighbors. Early in the morning, on July 6, 1942, the Frank family disappeared. To the outside world, it seemed like they had vanished. But they had not gone far. This is where the real story truly begins, because inside their hiding place, Anne would write words that would live forever. Otto had been secretly preparing a safe place for months. It was inside the building of his business at 263 Prinsengracht in Amsterdam. Behind a movable bookcase, hidden from view, there was a small apartment. This hidden space became known as the secret annex. It was not a comfortable house. It was made up of a few small rooms with little light, very little space, and no freedom. The family would have to live there quietly, in fear, for an unknown amount of time. Anne was 13 years old when she entered the annex. Only a few weeks earlier, she had received a red and white checkered diary for her birthday. She named it Kitty. From that day on, she began writing in it almost every day. She wrote about her fears, her hopes, her anger, and her dreams. She did not know it yet, but her diary would one day tell the world what it meant to live in hiding. A week after the Franks moved in, another family joined them, the Van Pels family. Herman Van Pels had worked with Otto. His wife, Augusta, often disagreed with Anne's mother. Their son, Peter, was 16 years old, quiet, shy, and sometimes lonely. Later, a dentist named Fritz Pfeffer also came to the annex and had to share her small room with him, which she did not like at all. In her diary, she called him Mr. Dussel. Now there were 8 people living together in a very small space. Life inside the secret annex was extremely difficult. No one could go outside. Windows had to stay closed and covered. During the day, they could not make noise because workers were in the building below. They could not walk loudly, talk freely, or even flush the toilet. Every sound felt dangerous. They were hiding from death, and even a small mistake could expose them. 4 brave helpers risked their own lives to protect them. Miep Gies, Jan Gies, Victor Kugler, and Johannes Kleiman secretly brought them food, books, and news from the outside world. Without these courageous people, the families could not have survived for 2 years. In the afternoons, after the workers left, the group could move more freely. Anne spent her time reading books, studying languages, and writing stories. But the most important thing she did every day was write in her diary. Her words were honest and emotional. She wrote about arguments, friendships, fear, and hope. Even in darkness, her thoughts were full of life. Through her writing, Anne stayed strong, and her voice grew louder than the silence around her. Inside the secret annex, Anne did not only write about events, she wrote about emotions. She wrote about the constant fear of being discovered, about her arguments with her mother, about her deep love and respect for her father, and about the loneliness that sometimes felt too heavy for her young heart. She also wrote about her dreams of freedom and her growing feelings for Peter. Her words were thoughtful and mature, almost like the writing of someone much older than 13. Anne hoped that one day the war would end and that people would read her diary and understand what it meant to live in hiding. At first, Anne and Peter Van Pels did not connect well. She thought he was too quiet and a little boring. But as the months passed, their relationship slowly changed. They were the only teenagers in the annex, both trapped and lonely. They began talking more often, sharing their fears and hopes. One day, Peter kissed Anne. In her diary, she wrote about how sweet he was and how much she wished he loved her as deeply as she loved him. They would sit together in the attic, looking out at a small piece of blue sky, talking softly about life beyond the walls. Still, Anne questioned her feelings. She wondered if it was true love or simply 2 young people trying to feel alive in a world filled with death. Even so, their friendship gave her comfort during those cold and silent days. While the outside world was collapsing under war, Anne's mind continued to grow. She read books about history, philosophy, and politics. She studied the war carefully and imagined the future she hoped to live. She did not only want to survive, she wanted to become someone important. She once wrote that she wanted to continue living even after her death, and that was why she wrote. She believed that words could live longer than the human body. Slowly, her diary began to feel less like a private notebook and more like a book meant for the world. Although they had no newspapers, no internet, and no freedom, the people in the annex secretly listened to a small radio. They heard news about Jews being sent to concentration camps and about bombs falling across Europe. They also heard that the Allied forces, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, were fighting back. Sometimes the news gave Anne hope. Other times, it broke her heart when she heard that friends had disappeared. Yet she never completely lost her belief that peace would return. In 1944, Anne heard an important radio broadcast from a Dutch government minister who had escaped to London. He said that after the war, letters and diaries written during the occupation should be collected. That message changed Anne deeply. She decided to rewrite and improve her diary so it could become a real book. She even gave it a title, The Secret Annex. She wanted the world to know the truth, not only about her life, but about all the people suffering silently under Nazi rule. But just as hope was growing stronger, tragedy arrived. On August 4, 1944, after more than 2 years in hiding, the secret annex was discovered. Nazi officers, led by Karl Silberbauer, broke into the hiding place. To this day, no one knows for certain who betrayed them. The 8 people inside were arrested. Their brave helpers were also taken, though later released. Anne stood there frightened and shaking. Her diary lay on the floor, left behind in the chaos. After their arrest, Anne, her sister Margot, her parents, Peter, his parents, and Fritz Pfeffer were sent away to concentration camps. Anne was only 15 years old. For more than 2 years she had lived quietly, dreaming of freedom and writing her heart onto paper. In just a few minutes, that hidden world ended. The silence of the annex was over. Now they would face a new and terrifying reality, the camps, where survival became a daily battle against death. Anne's life, the life she had carefully shared in her diary, remained behind in the secret annex. She did not know that her words would survive for generations. She did not know that her diary would live on. After the arrest, the 8 people in hiding were taken to Westerbork, a transit camp in the Netherlands. It was not yet the worst place, but it was still filled with suffering. The rooms were overcrowded and dirty. There was no privacy. Guards shouted constantly. The food was cold and poor in quality. Prisoners lived in fear of being sent to the east. Everyone understood what that meant. It meant deportation to Auschwitz concentration camp, and almost certain death. At Westerbork, Anne and the others were treated like criminals because they had gone into hiding. They were given the hardest and dirtiest work. Anne carried heavy stones. Margot moved wet mattresses filled with lice. Rats and insects were everywhere. The days were noisy, exhausting, and full of despair. Yet even there, Anne tried to hold on to hope. She believed the war might end soon. She still dreamed of freedom. After about 1 month, their names were placed on a transport list. On September 3, 1944, they were forced onto a crowded cattle train with more than 1,000 other people. There were no seats, no proper food, almost no air. For 3 days they traveled in darkness and fear. Children fainted. Elderly people died standing up. No one knew their destination. Anne held Margot's hand tightly. Edith tried to comfort her daughters. Otto remained calm, trying to give strength simply by being present. When the train finally stopped, the doors opened at Auschwitz. Auschwitz was not just a prison. It was a system built for mass murder. There were gas chambers, crematoriums, guard towers, and electric fences. On the platform, Nazi officers shouted orders while doctors pointed prisoners to the left or to the right. One direction meant forced labor. The other meant immediate death. Families were separated within seconds. Otto Frank was sent to the men's camp. Anne, Margot, and their mother Edith were sent to the women's camp. Peter, his parents, and Fritz Pfeffer were also separated. That moment was the last time Anne saw her father. Life inside Auschwitz was brutal beyond imagination. Prisoners' heads were shaved. They were given thin, dirty uniforms full of lice. They woke up before sunrise and stood for hours in freezing temperatures. Food was almost nothing, dark water called coffee and a small piece of bread each day. Disease spread quickly. There was no soap, no medicine, and no mercy. Anne became weak and sick, yet she still tried to comfort others. She told stories, shared memories, and tried to keep hope alive. Even in such darkness, she searched for small pieces of light. Her mother, however, grew weaker each day. Edith Frank gave her food to her daughters and sacrificed her own strength for them. In January 1945, only weeks before Auschwitz was liberated, Edith died from starvation. Anne never had the chance to say goodbye. In late October 1944, Anne and Margot were transferred again, this time to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany. The Nazis were moving prisoners as Allied forces advanced. Bergen-Belsen was chaotic, overcrowded, and filled with disease. Anne hoped her father and Peter had also been moved somewhere safer. She did not know that Otto was still alive in Auschwitz. The suffering was not over. But even in the darkest chapter of her life, Anne's spirit, the same spirit that filled her diary with hope, had not completely disappeared. At Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, life became even more unbearable. There were no gas chambers there, but death was everywhere. The camp was overcrowded and filled with dirt, freezing cold, and terrible disease. There was almost no clean water, no proper toilets, and no medical care. Typhus spread quickly from person to person. Bodies lay on the ground for days without burial. People died where they slept, and no one had the strength to help them. Anne and Margot were weak, hungry, and covered in lice. They were so exhausted that even crying felt impossible. Even in that darkness, Anne tried to comfort her sister. She whispered words of hope, even when she barely believed them herself. But one day, Margot fell from her bed in the crowded barracks. She was too weak to stand again. Soon after, she died from sickness and extreme exhaustion. Anne saw her sister's final moments. After Margot's death, something inside Anne broke. She had already lost her mother. Now she had lost her sister. She was alone, sick, and without strength. In February or early March 1945, only weeks before the camp was liberated, Anne Frank died of typhus. She was just 15 years old. Her body was placed in a mass grave, without a name, without a marker, without a goodbye. But although her body did not survive, her words did. The war ended in May 1945. The camps were opened, and the world slowly began to understand the horror that had taken place. Of all the 8 people who hid in the secret annex, only one returned, Otto Frank. He came back to Amsterdam alone. He waited for news of his wife and daughters, hoping for a miracle. But one by one, he learned the painful truth. Edith had died. Margot had died. And finally, Anne had died. Otto had lost everything. Then one day, Miep Gies came to him with a small bundle of papers. She had saved them from the floor of the secret annex on the day of the arrest. She had hoped to return them to Anne after the war. Those papers were Anne's diary, the same diary she had received for her 13th birthday, the diary she lovingly called Kitty. At first, Otto could not bring himself to read it. The pain was too deep. But eventually, he opened it. As he read each page, he discovered a side of his daughter he had never fully known. He knew Anne was lively and intelligent, but in her diary he found a girl who was thoughtful, brave, and wise beyond her years. She wrote about fear and loneliness, about growing up in hiding, about her changing body and her complicated emotions. She wrote honestly about her anger, her doubts, and her unshakable belief that people were still good at heart. Through those pages, Anne spoke again. Her physical voice had been silenced in the camp, but her written voice became stronger than ever, a voice that would soon travel across the world and touch millions of hearts. Anne once wrote, "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." When Otto Frank read those words, he broke down in tears. In the middle of so much cruelty and suffering, his young daughter had still chosen hope. At that moment, he understood something powerful. Anne had not simply written a diary. She had written a message to the world. Through her honest thoughts, she showed what war does to children, what hatred does to innocent lives, and why freedom and human dignity matters so deeply. Otto decided he would make Anne's dream come true. She had written that she wanted to become a writer and live on through her words. So he carefully edited her diary, combining the different versions she had written and preparing it for publication. He removed a few very private parts but remained faithful to her voice and spirit. In 1947, her diary was first published in Dutch under the title The Diary of a Young Girl. At the beginning, only a small number of people read it. But those who did were deeply moved. Slowly, the book spread across Europe and then the world. It was translated into dozens of languages, eventually more than 70. Millions of readers, young and old, connected with Anne's voice. Students studied her words in classrooms. Adults read her story and wept. Survivors of the Holocaust felt understood. Anne Frank became one of the most important voices of the Holocaust, not because she was powerful or famous, but because she was real and truthful. She was not a soldier with a weapon. She was a teenage girl with a pen, and her pen proved stronger than hatred. The building at 263 Prinsengracht in Amsterdam still stands today. It is now the Anne Frank House, a museum visited by people from all over the world. Visitors walk through the hidden bookcase, see the small rooms where 8 people once lived in silence, and read Anne's words written on the walls. They do not come only to see history. They come to feel it. Anne never grew up. She never became a writer in the traditional way. She never had the chance to live freely or build the future she imagined. But her life was not meaningless. Her diary continues to teach lessons about kindness, courage, and the danger of hatred. She reminds us that hate does not begin with violence, it begins with words, division, and silence. Her story warns us to speak up when others are treated unfairly and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Anne once wrote that she wanted to live on after her death, and she does. Every time someone opens her diary, her voice speaks again. Every time someone chooses understanding over hatred, her message lives on. Her body was destroyed by war, but her words survived. And they will continue to survive for generations. From Anne Frank's story, we learn many powerful lessons. First, your voice matters. Even a young girl, hidden away in silence, was able to change the world through honest and courageous words. Anne had no freedom, no public platform, and no stage. She was just a teenage girl hiding behind a bookcase. But she had a pen, and with that pen she told the truth honestly and bravely. Even when the world tried to silence her, her words survived. The first lesson from her life is simple but powerful: you do not need to be famous to be heard. You only need courage to write, to speak, and to share your truth, even if you feel afraid. The second lesson is that kindness can exist even in the darkest times. Meep Geese and the other helpers risked their lives to protect the Frank family. They did not help for money or reward. They helped because it was the right thing to do. Anne's story reminds us that even when the world feels cruel, there are always good people. And we can choose to be one of them. The third lesson is that hate does not begin with violence, it begins with words and ideas. The tragedy of the Holocaust did not start with camps. It started with blame, lies, discrimination, and silence. Small acts of hatred were ignored until they became something terrible. Anne's life teaches us to speak up when someone is treated unfairly and never ignore the early signs of injustice. The fourth lesson is that while we cannot always control the world around us, we can control our thoughts. Anne could not go outside. She could not live freely. But inside her diary, her mind was free. She imagined, learned, and created stories. Even when her physical world became smaller, her inner world became bigger. This reminds us that even in difficult times, our minds can remain powerful and creative. The fifth lesson is to believe in goodness, even when it feels impossible. Anne famously wrote that in spite of everything, she still believed people were truly good at heart. She had every reason to lose faith in humanity, yet she chose hope instead of hatred. Her example shows us that pain does not have to make our hearts cold. Hope is not weakness, it is strength. The sixth lesson is that words can live longer than life itself. Anne died before her 16th birthday, but her diary became one of the most important books in history. Published as the diary of a young girl, her writing reached millions across the world. Today, visitors still walk through the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam to understand her story. What she created with simple paper and ink became immortal. This teaches us that what we create, our words, our art, our truth, can continue long after we are gone. The seventh and final lesson is to never forget. Anne Frank is not only a figure from the past, she is a warning for the future. Her story reminds us what can happen when hatred grows and good people remain silent. Remembering her is not only about feeling sadness. It is about choosing action, choosing kindness, courage, and humanity every day. This is not just a biography. It is the story of a young girl whose voice changed the world. If her journey touched your heart, helped you understand history and human nature, and supported your English learning through clear and meaningful storytelling, then continue learning with us on Silver Narratives. Stories like Anne Frank's must never be forgotten, because every time we read her words, her voice lives again.